Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 116 of the longest tenured Denver Nuggets spin off podcast in the world. Welcome to the DNVR Nuggets' Serbian Corner. My name is Miroslav, and before we begin, please let me remind you to like the video on YouTube. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the DNVR Sports YouTube channel and DNVR Nuggets podcast channel. The audio version is perfect for your commute or to make your office/home office time more bearable. If you want to support the show more directly, you can become a Patreon supporter at patreon.com/MiroslavCuk, just like my Seco tier supporters, Peter Plummer and Daniel Lynch. The last show was only 4 days ago, but there's no shortage of topics after the last two games versus the Raptors and the Thunder. Let's just talk briefly about the Raptors game. This was the second game in a row without Jamal, and after only 4 minutes, Aaron Gordon had to leave because of a calf injury. Coach Malone had to coach his ass off in this game. The Raptors played hard. Pirtle demonstrated why he's paid so much. Their defense was very frantic, if that's a word, causing a lot of turnovers by Jokić and Westbrook, and Dick was on fire all night long. We got real minutes from Zeke Naji, even some minutes with him and DJ together. But the detail I specifically liked was Malone's unwillingness to go small. There was only one brief stint in the fourth quarter with three guards. Other than that, coach relied on size. The biggest detail was him closing with Jokić, Porter, and three of the boot boys, Strotter, CB, and Payton. It was a risky move, and thank God RJ Barrett ended the game shooting 5 of 21 instead of 6 of 21. That last shot for the win was halfway in. Joker had a triple-double. Westbrook added 21, 6, and 6. Porter 19 and 9. And the three stooges of Calvin Booth all scored in double digits. It was the fourth win against a bad team this season. Thunder game. Thunder came to Denver on a 7-game win streak. The Nuggets had no Jamal and no Aaron. Peyton Watson started at the 4, and only Strotter, Tyson, and Zeke Naji came off the bench in this game. Michael Malone really wanted to win this game, so Joker ended up playing almost 40 minutes, and Michael Porter was above 41. Per usual, the Nuggets fell big. This time it was minus 16 in the mid-third quarter, and again, per usual, they didn't give up. Even the non-Jokić minutes at the beginning of the fourth quarter looked good, with Russell Westbrook both scoring and finding MPJ on clean looks. At the 8-minute mark in the fourth, Michael Malone again made a gutsy move and took Westbrook out of the game, even though he was having an amazing night with 29, 6, and 6. The right move was once again to close with Joker, MPJ, and the three amigos. The Nuggets opened a 8-point lead with 2 minutes to go, even though Joker scored only 1 point in the fourth. Nikola had some late turnovers against the frenetic Thunder defense, so the Thunder got the lead down to 2. Peyton missed 2 clutch free throws, but immediately made up for them by blocking SGA's shot in the last possession of the game. A first win against a good team this season. The Nuggets have won 5 out of the last 6 games. My guest for today is a super busy NBA analyst. He is the senior NBA writer at the Action Network and a podcast host for Action Network, Locked On NBA, Locked On Nuggets. He's my fellow young player doubter and coach defender. And all of that didn't stop him from replying positively to my invitation to be the guest today within minutes. It's hardwood paroxysm, but for friends, just Matt Moore. Welcome to the show, Matt.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So the last time we spoke on a show was ages ago on the old Nuggets Serbia podcast. And the only reason why I was so hesitant to call you on since is that I understand how busy you are and my shows are on weekends. And I'm sure you, as a family man, you don't need more weekend work stuff. And I'd also like to stay your friend. So I waited for a Thursday time slot to pick your brain a bit.
I appreciate it. My weekends are definitely, especially Saturdays, are tied up with my daughter is now playing basketball. And so I'm usually at her games going crazy and yelling constantly at both her and coaching her and the officials yelling at the referees. So my Saturdays are very busy.
Would you say you have Michael Malone energy on those games?
Absolutely. I almost coached. If I hadn't had COVID, I probably would have coached this year, and you would have seen a lot of rage timeouts from me. I would have done the mad timeout and done the that he does. So, I get very into it.
Yeah, this season rage timeouts isn't even the top of Moch's game. He is now in the sphere of like disappointed timeouts, like beyond mad. But you know what? The thing seems to be turning up to the right direction. So I never pretend to be a real journalist or a real analyst or whatever. So it was really fun for me to go to the press conferences with you and all the other Nuggets people at the Ball Arena and see that you are in fact typing crazy fast, just like Nikola Jokić noticed years ago. Is that the case only when you are in a rush to catch something important, or do you just work in Westbrook gear always?
No, I'm always, that's a good description for it. I'm always in Westbrook gear when I'm typing, and I'm a loud typer too. It's always clack, clack, clack. And so I try and tone it down a little bit when we're in the post game if everybody's writing, because I don't want to bother my fellow writers in the room. But yeah, I am a notorious. My kids will yell at me and be like, "Dad, you're so loud. Can you please don't type that like that fast or that loud?" And I'm like, I'm just working. I'm not even aware of it. So that was one of my favorite moments was Nikola calling me out for that. So I'm saying, good job. That was great.
Good job, brother. That's right. So I'm not going to talk to you too much about the Thunder game. DNVR fellas did a good job, as well as you did in 1 a.m. last night, as you usually would do. But I have to ask you about one detail. I'm famously low on SGA compared to the consensus. I'm not saying he is not an MVP candidate. It's just that I believe there is a thing that bothers his game. We saw that thing 15 months ago in the FIBA World Cup semifinal game between Canada and Serbia, when the Serbian zone left SGA scoreless for a huge chunk of that game. Joker wasn't playing in that World Cup, but I'm sure he watched it. And last night, the Nuggets played the zone against SGA again. And I'm not saying that was the biggest factor for the win, but it was a part of it. When the Nuggets play the youngsters, they have the bodies to rotate in that zone. Also, Christian Braun was amazing one-on-one. SGA was just 3 of 10 in the second half. In their first meeting, OKC was shooting badly and still won comfortably. This time they made 16 threes and lost the game. What was, in your opinion, the biggest difference between the two games?
Yeah, for me, it's about actually speed. So they're down 16 in that third quarter, the Nuggets are. And Denver starts pushing pace relentlessly once the kids come in. And it's Peyton Watson and Christian Braun and Julian Strawther. And obviously, Peyton and Christian are great defenders, and so they can be disruptive. But Julian is really good as a player that knows how to navigate space and transition. And so they were able to get out and run really relentlessly. And, I think Nikola had a big part in that too, because he was playing so hard and grabbing the ball and really looking to push the pace. And I asked Jokić about it after the game, and he said, yeah, that was really something that we wanted to do tonight. And I was like, is that something with this team or just in this game? And he was like, it's different with every opponent. Sometimes you want to slow down and play organized basketball. Against them, we really wanted to get out and run faster. And Malone said that was the biggest point of emphasis for him at the half was we cannot go against their set defense. We've got to get out and run. And when they do that, you see that pace improve. For me, the actual impact was not as much on the offensive end, even though they scored well. It was that the Thunder what the Thunder want to do is they want to space you out and methodically pick you apart with really good drivers, drive, kick, drive, kick, drive, kick. When you get them in a more frenetic pace, they get too fast. They speed themselves up and they don't take care of their reads, and they will get a little in a hurry. And what winds up happening there is they wind up creating lower quality shots. And they have some guys that can make them, but those are still, you have a much better chance against that than surviving their onslaught of creating open threes. And so they were able to really do a good job, I thought the Nuggets did, of not only pushing pace to help their offense out, but it also sped up the pace of the game on both sides and got OKC out of their offensive comfort zone.
One thing that I feel happened last night also was the first time this season the Nuggets actually used their home court advantage and the altitude against a visiting team, because the Nuggets have been playing so slowly the past several seasons, and we know what it is. Jamal Murray is really a slow, methodical point guard, and this was working really fine for the Nuggets while they had all of their guys, including Bruce Brown and Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. But now when the rotation is shortened and we have 9 real guys, as Calvin Booth says, and let's just count them out. Like Dario Saric is already out of the rotation. That doesn't mean he's not going to come back to the rotation at some point this season. But without him, that's 8 guys. And now Aaron and Jamal are hurt. That's 6 real guys. So now we needed to add in Zeke Naji and Tyson, Hunter Tyson. So even with those 2 unreal guys, the Nuggets were able to play a really, really good game against probably the best regular season team in the West right now. So my question here is, the Nuggets really seem to enjoy this high pace of game. At least it looked like on their faces that they were really enjoying the game they played. How do you think would be the best way to reintegrate Jamal Murray into that formula and try to keep the rhythm and pace, at least at home games, as an advantage?
So I think this question's a little bit more complicated. The numbers, and we've talked about this on Locked On, the numbers do support the idea that with Jamal, they're playing a lot slower, and without him, they play a lot faster. Now, without him, that's mostly Russ, right? Like Russ is going to run the ball no matter what. That's just how Russell Westbrook is wired. One thing I do think is when the Nuggets kind of reach their peak and they're so good offensively, that the coaching staff, I think, imparted on Jokić, and he probably agreed, if we slow down, we're going to have fewer turnovers. And if we have fewer turnovers, it's very difficult to beat us. And it's true. Like, I've looked up the numbers, and the Nuggets win like 78% of the time when they have fewer turnovers than their opponent. And so I think that there's a little bit of a correlation and causation where, yes, they play slower with Jamal because they're running 2-man game. And excuse me, they are trying on purpose to control the game and not give up easy stuff. There were opportunities last night where there could have been more turnovers than there were. That doesn't mean I don't think it's the best way for them to play, but I do think that it's a balance that you have to kind of strike. If you can play fast without turning the ball over, that's great. It's just very difficult to do. And I think that finding that balance, I think, is going to be a trick, and it is going to depend on the opponent. Like, that was one thing that Nikola was like pretty adamant about last night when I kind of checked him on it, was like, there are teams that you don't want to try this against. And so I think that I think that playing with tempo is the bigger thing for me, is that if you can get into your sets, and I think that that's an area where there's a disagreement between Jamal and Jokić, where I think Jokić would want to start every set at 18 seconds and work through the entire clock. And I think Jamal thinks, let's get set up. And that means let's take 10 seconds to get set up. And you don't need to take 10 seconds to get set up. Like, get the ball across and execute. I've said this multiple times that Tony Parker was one of the best I have ever seen at running off of makes and making sure that you are initiating your actions with 18 seconds on the shot clock. And if you do that and you make them guard multiple actions, when you have the talent that Denver has, or these other teams that play at this level like Golden State, you're going to win that battle most of the time. You're just going to win it because it's too hard to guard that many actions and motions with the talent available. So I do think that you're right, that there is an urgency that needs to be had with Jamal, but it's less about last night was let's get out and run fat, like breakneck, just downhill, Christian Brown barreling through people. I think that with Murray, when he comes back, it needs to be more about, hey, we need to, after makes, we need to be getting the ball up and into our sets. And that takes conditioning, which is difficult not only for Murray, but I think it's difficult for everyone on the team right now, except for the young guys. Like that to me is like the correlation with what we saw last night is, oh, they looked like they looked like way more crisp and they were able to like play with more fun. Yeah, because the guys that were playing are actually in shape. And that helps a lot. And that, I think, is one of the key factors. And that's not to say that Murray's the only one, because that's been evident that I think everybody on the team was not in great shape to start the season.
Is it common for veteran teams to come into the season not in great shape, or is it something that you find more to be a feature or a bug of the Nuggets than the other veteran teams?
It's pretty common. When you play as many games as they do and you don't have the time in the off season. So if your season ends in April and then you have all of May and all of June to just take off and recover, and then you can work your way up and start with conditioning in July, and then you sharpen the basketball side built off of what you've done body wise in July. You work on that stuff in August. And then you roll into September and it's team construct, and then you're off to the races, and you're building up on that with conditioning as it goes along. If you have a run until May, all right, you take June off. And if you don't have international competition, you take July off. But if you do, then you play in July, and then you take a little bit of August off to recover. And then you're trying to do conditioning, ramp up, everything. And the Nuggets went to Abu Dhabi, and that really did mess with things this year. I asked Murray about that. And so the timeline's kind of truncated. I will say the Nuggets, for not being over 30, are a little bit higher in this regard. That the Celtics with Pierce and Garnett famously, like Paul Pierce, after he turned 30, Paul didn't do anything until the season, and he played himself into shape. And so he would look awful the first 2 months of the season, and then in January, all of a sudden, it's Paul Pierce time again. And that's pretty common for a lot of guys. Now, there's guys that are maniacal, and they come in great shape every year. Depends on how much you're dependent on your athleticism. But I wouldn't say that it's uncommon for a team like Denver, given their playoff runs, to not be in the best shape and to work themselves into shape as the season goes along.
Yeah, I know I live in the fantasy land, but since the Nuggets play at altitude, I would just make a mandatory obligation for every player to just come to Denver a month before the training camp, and just like you just have to be here. And I know the NBA doesn't work like that, but you know what? There probably are some guys on your team you could issue that kind of mandate to, right?
And some of them are, they do a workout at Red Rocks with the younger guys. That is brutal and really kind of does help get you acclimated. They do a lot to try and get players acclimated to altitude. They have a lot of technology and different things that they do. But the reality is like when you're a $35 million NBA player, you have other things. You got other things on the docket. And that's not just like having fun. Sometimes that's business stuff or family stuff. And I do think that you have to kind of respect some of those things, but there is a cost to it for sure. I think that there's always more stuff that you can be doing, but for the body, but you have to be reasonable with the toll these guys go through and managing how much work it is to get to where they need to be.
Okay, let's take one short break. And this is because I want to talk to you about floors. And when we talk about the floors, Empire today is just the mainstream of mainstream. If you need new flooring, you don't need to look further. So many people already enjoy Empire Today floors. Just ask them about their great experience. With Empire Today, you get shop at home convenience, the right product for your needs, quick and professional installation, and a price match guarantee. Empire Today is the best place to get new flooring. So, of course, They have copycats that will tell you that they have the lowest prices available, stuff like that. Empire will never say that because they are just using top level floors, and they're only putting floors in your home that they would put in theirs as well. Their philosophy is to help you find what you need, not to overwhelm you with thousands of choices and substitutes. Their virtual floor designer is really cool. You can use it to see how the new floor would look in your room. And flooring is all Empire today does. They live and breathe flooring, so you can be confident you're getting honest, upfront advice. They service their warranties. If an issue does arise, just call Empire. Schedule a free in-home estimate today. All listeners can receive a $350 off discount when they use the promo code DNVR. Restrictions apply. See empiretoday.com/DNVR for details. That's empiretoday.com/DNVR. Okay, we are back, and now I have to ask you something political. And I'm not talking about the elections that just happened in America. I'm going to ask you about the influence of big media outlets like ESPN on front offices and coaches and stuff like that. And we've all seen that Ramona Shelburne article on ESPN about the challenges the Nuggets are facing with team building versus the second apron, stuff like that. But she also mentioned what a great job Calvin Booth did so far, and that his contract is about to get extended. That was like a new piece of information for everybody in that. Do you think that that kind of thing could influence a coach like Michael Malone to immediately start playing the youngsters next to Nikola? What actually happened right after that article went out? Or is it just a coincidence because, everybody got hurt and Dario Saric was unplayable after 5 games?
Yeah, I think it's more the latter. I think that, look, the injuries, if Jamal and Aaron are there, they play and they close and they keep the same rotations. And one of the things that happens is the veterans will always want to kind of know the rotations for not only themselves, but for the others. And when there's young guys playing, it's more of, okay, the coach has more discretion here. I think that Dario being unplayable kind of that changes the dynamic for everything, right? You have to get more creative with your lineups. I do think that Peyton played a lot and had a big role. The idea was always for Peyton Watson to play and for Peyton Watson to have a lot of minutes and for Peyton Watson to have a lot of opportunity. And Peyton got hurt in preseason and got off to a really rocky start, much like Christian did last year. And Christian, it took months for him to look right. And Peyton already is having a big impact. But, Peyton, I think, was always going to play a big role. And I think Julian was always going to play a big role. Like, Julian was in discussion to be the starting 2 guard. If Christian had not absolutely gotten off to the great start that he did, if he had struggled in training camp, then, Julian might have gotten the starting nod. And so I'm not surprised that Peyton's playing and Julian's playing and Christian's starting. And so those are the guys that they have. Those were always kind of the guys that they knew that they had. And, Russ plays. And I think that the interesting thing here is more not closing with Russ. Malone talked about it last night as, I wanted to get Russ back in, but they were playing so well together and wanted to give him that. And it was such a good matchup and they were just playing so great. Which that's fine, but he's done this more than once where he's not closing with Russ. I think that there's probably something in there where he doesn't necessarily want to close with Russell Westbrook, and maybe that changes. Maybe the next game he closes, right? But I do think that there's something interesting there. But in general, I think the article from Ramona was, it was a political move, right? It was clearly from Booth's side and engineered that way. And that happens pretty commonly. And it's, a little bit of a going on the offensive to defend himself, as everyone's been so critical of the 2 timelines approach. And so kind of getting a piece of media out there, and it's worked out perfectly because that article comes out, Jamal and Aaron get hurt, and then they pull off their biggest win because of the contributions of those guys. So it worked out really well. And today, Calvin Booth can absolutely feel like, see, I told you. But the problem is, and he knows this, Calvin's a smart guy, knows this. It's not about today. It's about the season. And you got to do this over and over again. It's going to be a net positive over the course of the season. But that also depends on the lineups, which is where the tension, I think, with the coaching staff comes in.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that because you're not a Nuggets fan. That doesn't mean you don't want the Nuggets to win. That just means that you would be glad if the Nuggets win because that's good for business, I guess, because you're based in Denver. I mean, let's be realistic. But on the other hand, Christian Brown has been playing amazingly this season, like topped everybody's expectations. Like I was always high on him as an almost finished product, ready to play, and I expected him to be much better playing next to Joker and the starters, which makes sense, of course. But I think he overtook everything we expected of him, and he was really the second best Nuggets so far, which also tells you a bit about some of the Nuggets starters as well. But let's not go the negative path here. On the other hand, you still need both Peyton and Strother, or at least one and a half of them, to hit this season in order to have a competent playoff rotation, unless some kind of move is going to happen in February or so. So my question to you is, are the Nuggets crazy to do the two timelines project using late first rounders, unlike the Warriors did with high first rounders, and that one didn't pan out as well, or that one didn't pan out?
I'll say this: I think Christian was an absolute hit, and that was a first rounder that they nailed. Peyton is still, he has such a high ceiling. I think that his ceiling is like all-star 3-level scorer. I don't know if he'll get there, but that's how highly I think of his potential. He's still such a kid. Julian, I think, can be a good NBA player. Like, he can be a good rotation NBA player. The mistake that was made was not with the first round picks, but instead it was with the second round picks. Because when you need those guys to play, it gets really tough. And Hunter, I think, is playing, fine to good this season. Hasn't been able to hit, which is a big deal because he's billed as a shooter. Jalen's obviously a miss there. The key there, and I've kind of talked about this, is Booth didn't just go in on the two timelines, is he made it to where there was no option. He gave guaranteed multi-year deals to those guys. And I think at the time it was worth the gamble because we don't know what this new CBA is going to look like. These might be really valuable as long as they're as good as I think they are, but they haven't been. And that becomes, the source of tension of, well, if they developed, if you gave them floor time, maybe they'd be as good as I thought they were. They're not good. That's why they're not playing. That's why you shouldn't have signed them. Like, that's the tension point. But instead, what you really should do is more of what the Miami Heat do, which is plug and play, try guys, see who works. And then if they don't, you remove them from the rotation. They go through guys. They use their G League affiliate in in Sioux Falls, and move guys in and out. And they find guys that come out of nowhere that they're all of a sudden like, hey, I think we got something here. And then they play a little bit, and then they play a little bit more, and all of a sudden they're starting. And they just go through them. And some guys they play and they're like, that's not working. And then they move on and they bring someone else in behind them. They have this kind of steady, all right, does this work? Okay, good. Oh, does this work? No? Okay, next guy. And you need to flip through them a little faster to try things. Going into a season and just being like, yes, no, this is our 15 guys, including multiple second round picks on multi-year deals and fringe guys that are never going to play. When you get in that situation, if you have any misses whatsoever in your top 7, if Dario Saric is unplayable, if Aaron Gordon gets hurt, if Jamal Murray gets hurt, if those things happen, you don't have any of these alternatives. Like, the Nuggets have done really well in these games to survive without Murray. They don't have any point guards. Like, Russell Westbrook is your only point guard right now. And they need to have been able to be like, you know what, Jalen, maybe we'll circle back. We'd love to have you in the G League, but we're going to move on. You can't do that if the guy's contract's guaranteed. And so they needed to be able to like cycle through and bring in like, oh, we've got this guy in the G League. We really like it. Point guard. Let's bring him in and see how he works with the main club, and cycle through them to find guys that may pop or fit, or work out or the guys really like playing with. And they denied themselves the opportunity for that flexibility with how they approach the roster build.
So basically, with what they have right now, and you know very well all the Western teams and then their young cores, how would you assess the Nuggets' future comparing to let's say the top 5 uh, highest ranked teams in the West?
I'm actually higher on them, I think, than most of those teams. And the reason is when you've won a title, you know it works. We knew OKC was awesome last year. We knew they got better and we're going to be great this year. And I still think that the Thunder are likely going to win 60 plus games. But they haven't won a title and they don't know how to do it because they haven't done it. And there's so many teams that I have watched throughout my career where it's like, oh yeah, this team's like, look how good this is. They're so good and they've got draft picks. They're so good and they have more young guys. Imagine when this guy gets better, and that doesn't work out. I've just seen it. I've seen it with this Thunder team where it was like, man, they have Kevin Durant and James Harden and Russell Westbrook and Serge Ibaka. How good is this team going to be? And then they didn't win a title. KD was gone in 5 years. Like, this happens all the time. And you need a lot of things to go right in order for you to have, like, you have to have a lot of luck and fortune in order to get there. But one thing that kind of sets the bar is, does your superstar know how to win championships? And Jokić does. And that puts Denver ahead of all these other teams. Anthony Edwards doesn't know how to win a title. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander doesn't know how to win a title. John Morant doesn't know how to win a title. So even though, yeah, like there's great potential there, but we saw even last night, and it was one game in November, but OKC still has flaws, and OKC is still a young team that will fall victim to those types of things. There are no juggernauts anymore in the NBA. And as long as that's the case, then Denver is going to be ahead of the pack because they know what it takes to win a title because they're built around a guy who is an all-time great.
We're going to talk a bit more about the Nuggets as a collective, but before that, we'll take one short break. Don't go anywhere. Okay, we are back, and I saw this really nicely made tweet by Bennett Durando, who is a beat reporter for Denver Post. He's doing a great job there. And he mentioned that the Nuggets overcame a 14-point deficit, a 15-point deficit, a 16-point deficit, and a 17-point deficit to lead in the fourth quarter or overtime of 4 different games and won 3 out of those 4. And last night, they were also down 16 and won that game, even though it was earlier than the fourth quarter. What is your read into why the Nuggets get in this situation so often? And what does it say about them that they're so much more competitive in the fourth than in the first 3 quarters?
So I think for starters, that the bench is worse this year. That's undeniable. It's been worse, at least until recently. And then the bench has been worse, not just without Jokić, but the end of first quarter, end of third quarter stretches have been worse too. And that's where I've gotten like really concerned. Is last year it was you were dominant in every single Nikola Jokić minute. And then you were awful whenever he stepped off the floor. And then you were dominant whenever he was on the court again. This year, you're dominant when the starters are on. The starters, the intended starters with Jamal Murray and Aaron Gordon, have a better on-court net rating this season so far than either of the previous 2 seasons. That's how good Christian Braun's been. So the starters are killer. But you used to have, okay, it's the end of the first quarter, Christian Braun's going to come in for KCP, right, and you're going to have, maybe some Reggie Jackson minutes, but even those were good with Jokić early on. And those end of first quarter minutes were awesome too. This isn't a reflection of how Nikola's playing because he's been incredible every single game. He's been awesome. offensively. It's more a reflection of, yeah, there are limits to how good Jokić can make bad talent. Now, I think the minutes that they're getting with Russ right now, with Russ and Jokić working together, is going to help a lot because Russ is figuring out how to play more and more with Jokić, and Jokić is figuring out more and more how to get the best out of Russ. And that them building trust and chemistry will make those stretches end of first quarter, end of third quarter better. The fourth quarter is more of a staggered rotation, bench guys to start the fourth. And they've gotten a few outlier good performances, honestly, in those fourth quarters. Like they're not getting killed to start the fourth quarter the way that they are to the second quarter. And then when Jokić comes back in around the 8:30 mark, those minutes have been better. Like they seem to settle in and figure it out, even when they're not playing with the starters. And Malone's able to cater a little bit more to what the game needs. So if he needs to go to MPJ at 4, if he needs more defense, so he's going to put Peyton Watson in instead of MPJ, he's done that, and that's gotten them through the middle of the fourth quarters. So I think some of that's honestly on Malone for making second half adjustments that it takes him until the fourth quarter to get to sometimes. But I think a lot of it is kind of them trailing by so much is more indicative of where the bench roster is at, not only without Jokić, but with him this season. And anytime that you struggle with Jokić on the floor, there needs to be like red alarms because he's so good and makes everyone so much better.
We talked a bit about Russell Westbrook at the beginning of the show, and it was a mixed bag. Like he has improved his shooting after this last game considerably, honestly, because he was like 23% from the field and 20% from three, something like that, before the last game or before the last two games. I'm not sure about that. But on the other hand, he has brought so much energy to the team and energized the young pups. Pups just play awesome since Russell is there, and even when he steps out of the court, as we saw last night, they still play in that frenzy of a game. But what would be your prediction or odds? Better say that, like odds of Russell playing in all of the playoff games for the Nuggets this season, considering
I would say
he's already not, ending games.
I would say there is a 1 in 4 chance he plays in all of the Nuggets playoff games. I think it's very low, and that's because, as much as I think that Malone has really loved coaching Russ, they're in a really good place right now. We'll see if it holds. That's a long story to hold. And as much as the team loves him, I just think that there will be matchups where it's like, yeah, Russ can't play here. It might be game 6, it might be game 7, but there will probably be games where it's like, yeah, Russ just can't play here. And one of the things that the Dario move shows is that Malone is more understanding than he was last year, that you only have so long for guys to figure it out and for guys to play better. Because that's always a coach's impulse is, I don't need to change the plan. The guys just need to execute it. I don't need to not play Russ. Russ just needs to make his layups and then everything will work. But there's a point, I think, where Malone's reaching where he's kind of understanding, I might have to just adapt to what's working right now. I have to focus very much on the immediate. That the long-term goal is pretty much set in motion with the starters and how good they are and how they know how to play together and how good Jokić is. So I have to address the immediate. I can't make the team into a 60-win juggernaut. I think that's a large part of where he's getting to is, I can't make this team a 60-win juggernaut if I can have these guys work through their struggles. I just need to fix what's right in front of me. I got to take it one game at a time. I got to deal with the opponent right in front of me, and I got to try and program against that. That I think is one of the ironies actually of this is, everyone wants to develop the young guys, which is a long-term plan, and Malone's developing the young guys because it's a short-term plan. I need the young guys right now. And that's kind of the irony of how it's going. But I do think that's kind of like the model here. And so for Russ, I think there will be series where he'll be actually awesome. And people will be like, man, vintage Westbrook. Who knew? Who saw this coming? But I also think it's likely there's a series where you get to game 5 and he just cannot play. No Russell Westbrook here. Malone has gone to Julian Strother instead.
As you said, Michael Malone is coaching his ass off this season. He is so much more flexible than what he used to be. Do you think that's because, first of all, he's not on a long-term contract anymore? And also, I mean, that's crazy because he's like 4 games away from becoming the winningest coach in the Nuggets freaking history. And he is still not on a long-term contract. And he knows that he doesn't have a lot of guys, at least not a lot of proven guys on the roster. So do you think this is actually bringing the best of Malone right now? Or do you feel he is panicking a bit?
I don't think he's panicking. I think he's searching for what works, which is good. You don't want to be intractable and just do the same negative things over and over again. That's what's driven a lot of the guys at the MVR crazy, is just like running his head into a brick wall with the same rotations. I think that circumstances have forced him to be more creative, and he's better with those. But the one thing I will say is I find the lack of innovation on the offensive side alarming. I find the lack of experimentation defensively a little bit difficult. Now, some of that is like they have done some different stuff. You mentioned the zone. They've done a few different things, but the Nuggets have settled into such a comfortable place where they're just trying to trudge through the regular season that everyone knows who they are, what they're going to do, and what's coming. What makes them hard to stop is how good Jokić is. But this is a talented roster still. Even with the problems on the bench, this is still a very talented roster with really good skill sets across the board. And there's a lot more I think that probably could be done to deal with these kind of issues. I think he's aware of some of the problems. Like, he's focused on things like, we can't be giving up this many offensive rebounds. We can't be giving up this many turnovers for transition points. And he understands, I think, the 3-point struggle and how big of a problem that is. But I feel like there's probably more that probably should be done from his assistant side to try and find creative solutions. Now, I'm not a coach, so I don't know. Maybe there's just not those answers. Maybe that's not doable. But as much as I think that Malone has found some success, it's been like, oh, wow, he found a solution on accident because guys got hurt and he had to. Oh, he found that like he's playing Zeke Naji because Dario Saric is completely unplayable, right? And this is like a tricky thing because then again, it just becomes this constant back and forth of, it's the front office's fault for not giving his players. It's his fault for not getting the most out of the players he has. Like, that battle is going to go on all year. But I do think that ultimately that you have to kind of say that Malone is, at least the biggest thing is, he's not going down with the plan. He's not just like, nope, we had this plan going into the season, we're going to do it, and we're going to see it. And he's like, nope, that is not working, and we are not good enough to survive this. I can't have us start 3-7. I'm going to have to figure out something here, and he's pulling the necessary triggers to make that happen.
That's a great insight. Okay, let's take one more short break, and then we'll do some crystal ball stuff after it. Don't go anywhere. Okay, let's go back to some predictions. And since you are here, I like to have them in like the betting environment. What would need to happen this season for Joker to become a betting favorite for an MVP again? And secondly, what would need to happen for him to actually win the MVP? And is there a big difference between those two?
So I think it's, for him to become the favorite, he has to keep up his 3-point shooting. The Nuggets have to finish with a top 3 seed. and they have to have like a lot of signature wins. The bigger thing here is kind of there's an interchangeability where it's like it's not independent of other things. What I mean by that is if Joker finishes with the 3rd seed and he has amazing stats, but Luka finishes as the 2nd seed and has amazing stats, then Luka gets it. If Shea and the Thunder win 60 plus games and Shea's numbers are back to where they were last year, they're not there right now. If they get back to where they were last year, then Shea's going to win MVP. If Jason Tatum keeps honestly playing the way that he is and Boston wins 60 games, it's going to be hard. If you win 60 games, it's very hard not to give you the MVP. It happens a lot. But if you're the best player and you have an outstanding season for a 60-win team, that matters a lot with how the MVP goes. So I think that Joker's still going to be on. Not only is like Joker be on the ballot, I would put his over under on finish at probably 3.5. That it is likely that he finishes either 3rd or 4th on the MVP ballot. If things go wrong for other guys, so if the Mavericks aren't that good, okay, then there's a guy that slips behind Jokić, and now it's like 2-3. If the Thunder, if Shea suffers an injury, God forbid, then okay, now it's like Jokić versus maybe Tatum, and Jokić is probably going to get the edge there. There's going to be a lot of resistance to voting Jokić for a 4th, just like there was resistance to voting him for a 2nd and a 3rd. But I do think that his resume at this point is so unassailable that he has built up enough resistance to where it wouldn't be surprising if Jokić won another one.
So I have to ask you about Luka and the Mavericks. I feel the people are pretty high on the Nuggets comparing to last season's regular season, and even maybe comparing to the fact that they went all the way to the finals last season. Is it because Luka has been relatively bad for his standards and they're still faring okay? Is it people counting on a huge leap from Luka from here to what's going to happen in a week or so?
Yeah, there's kind of this idea that like Luka's, and I have to kind of agree with him, like Luka's going to put up numbers. Like he's not going to keep shooting like this. And so like he'll continue to put up numbers. Nikola actually, I thought, had the best description of Luka last year. He said he's a one-man army. And that's like the best way to describe him, in that he just does everything. His usage is so high. He scores so many points while having the assists and the rebounds. I think Jokić, I know Jokić impacts the game more. That's what's really interesting, is like Luka does all this stuff and it doesn't make his team better. Not that much. It makes him better. It just doesn't make him that much better. And Jokić does slightly less and makes them way better. And that to me is like a better kind of approach to basketball. But there is, I think you have to kind of assume at this point that Luka is going to wind up with, averaging 30 plus points, averaging 8 plus rebounds, averaging 8 plus assists. And that combination is always going to be very strong in the MVP discussion.
Yeah, but even with the Mavs as a team, like people expect them to win 55 or 57 games based on the fact that they're already better than a 500 team with Luka being bad, and when Luka will be good. But that also could mean that some of the guys that are playing really well right now on the Mavs.
Yeah, and I think I'm still pretty high on Dallas. I will say this, they've had some very curious and worrisome losses. The Houston one was the one that, like, last week that I was like, what's that loss? They are not a consistent team, and that to me that's a problem if you're going to try and win 55 games. You got to be really consistent. I just look at the roster and the shooting and the defense that Najee Marshall and Quentin Grimes brings. Their defense is still very good. And how good the offense, it's part of it, honestly, is surely the offense will get better. That's where a lot of us are. Is like, surely when you have Luka and Kyrie and Clay and these shooters and Derek Lively who can run the rim and finish and all this stuff, like surely the offense will be elite. And it wasn't last year. Luka and Kyrie had a 120 offensive rating on the court together. It's really good. It's just not elite. It's just not top level. And so there's kind of an assumption of that has to get better. And if the defense is still good and the offense is elite, then you have an elite team. But that to me is like the kind of the question mark here is the offense ever going to really catch up to the idea of where it should be? Because I don't think you're wrong in saying like, yeah, but like they're not actually doing it. And I think that there's a genuine question of whether they'll get there or not. They are being given a lot of credit before actually doing the thing.
Okay, so let's now get to the top Western teams in terms of their playoff potential, playoff strength. What would be your top 4 teams? And that's probably a different question, which teams should Nuggets try to avoid in the playoff bracket in order to get out of the West easier?
So I've got Oklahoma. I take a very metrics approach to this, which is like I've got numbers that I trust, and I built out a projection system. So right now I've got it, and I'll adjust this for kind of some of my opinions. I've got Oklahoma City number 1. I've got Phoenix number 2. Golden State's currently number 3, but I'm not ready to crown them yet. So I'll skip them for now. I would say the Mavericks number 3 still because of what I talked about with surely the offense will get better. The Wolves number 4, and then I would have Denver number 5. Those are kind of the 4 teams I think that are above them. As far as teams to avoid in the Western Conference playoffs, I've been on this train and I will continue to be on this train, and I will say it over and over again. There is no one that I am like the Nuggets absolutely need to avoid them in the Western Conference. There's nobody. OKC is tough, right? Had a 16-point lead last night, have won the last 4 meetings. There's so many things that they do well. They're awesome. Over the course of a series, it's going to get harder for OKC to stop Jokić than easier. It's not going to get easier. They're not going to wear him down. He's going to get better versus them. And I think that Denver would really have an ability to wear them out. If that series goes long, I like Denver more and more. Phoenix, you have a similar problem where as much as Yusuf Nurkic, I've been really impressed with Nurkic's maturity and how the player he's turned into compared to the guy he was here in Denver. But Jokic puts him in foul trouble every single game. And when he's off the floor, they get wrecked. And they still don't have the guys, even with Mason Plumlee, as much as I respect Mace, can't hold up versus Jokic. And so that's another one where, yeah, they're shooting more threes this year. That'd be a very tough, long series. Like Phoenix would be a very tough matchup for Denver. I would still lead Denver. Dallas, I would lean Denver, and I would lean Denver convincingly. I just don't love their ability to match up with what Denver does. Minnesota, they don't have Towns anymore. That fundamentally changes things. Adams talked a lot about this. They are not the same threat to Denver that they were with Karl Anthony Towns. If they trade Julius Randle for various pieces, maybe that changes. But right now, no. Like right now, I would still take Denver over Minnesota because they lost Towns. So I just gave you 4 teams that I think are better than Denver for the regular season. And I gave you 4 teams that I absolutely think Denver would beat in the playoffs. This is my whole thing is if Denver can survive this season with everything going up against them from the roster construction to these injury issues to the front office tension, if they make it through this season, they are going to have a very good chance to return to the NBA Finals.
Okay, I'm gonna need to find another Thursday later in the season to call you up again and ask you about Boston because I'm not talking to you about Boston today. Oh, even though you are high on the Knicks or not?
No,
Not really.
I'm high on the Cavs. I like the Cavs a lot. I think the Cavs are really good. Don't think they match up with Denver, but I do think that the Cavaliers are legitimately going to win 52 plus games, maybe 55 plus games. And I think that they'll be like, I would not be shocked if the Cavaliers finish with a 1 seed in the Eastern Conference, even as good as Boston looks right now.
Last question for tonight. For tonight, for you, it's still daytime. About OKC, we haven't seen them with any of their backup centers. Like they have 3 guys on the injury list behind Chet Holmgren. None of them are playing. It's a silly question because we don't know until we see it actually. But do you think what the Thunder will get with playing Hartenstein next to Holmgren, and that will be a tougher task for Jokić for sure? Do you think that might also get diminished by what they lose on the other hand because they will have a non-shooter in their lineup?
So I don't think so. I've been against this idea. Hartenstein's not a pure defensive player. He's not like a brute. He's not DeAndre Jordan, right? He's a very versatile guy. The biggest thing with Hartenstein is that he has a trigger mechanism where he's got two options. If you pressure the ball handler with two guys and he rolls, he can catch, he can then fire the floater, or he can pass to the corner. When you have guys that can do either one of those things, it gets very tough to stop. Your timing can, as you work on your timing, you can get better at it. But Hartenstein's very good at those sequences. And Chet's a shooter. So if Chet's a shooter, you still have the ability to space with four guys who can shoot and Hartenstein who can pass. And that combo, I still think, is very dangerous. I don't think they get worse on the offensive end noticeably with Hartenstein. I think it'll be about the same.
Okay. That's good for them. That's good for them. And by the way, people, you've heard Matt Moore said that the Nuggets are getting out of the West because he wouldn't take anybody above them in the playoffs. Let's just hope they end up with a top 4 or top 5 seeds, so they will not have too difficult of a first round matchup. While they're still, some of their guys are still ramping up for playoffs per usual. I'm so cynical. I'm sorry about that. Okay, do you have something in the works at Action Network? Some big piece you're usually working on something?
No, but I will tell you that you should be on the lookout. You can follow me on Twitter at HP Basketball and check out the Locked On Nuggets podcast. I have something I'm announcing for Nuggets fans probably on December 1st. So something special new coming that you should check out. So be on the lookout for that.
That's 20 days away. That's exciting. And I'm plugged in your show every day.
Thank you.
It's just a wonderful piece of content for every Nuggets fan. All right, that is all I've prepared for you this week, my dear listener. And please, with the cherry on top, take the word prepared very loosely. Be well, be safe, be kind to everybody. Call your mom, and until next week, Darrell Arthur.